He's been Group CEO of DBS Bank since 2009. The Harvard Business Review in 2019 named him one of the world's best performing CEOs. And he's known to love life, love fun, and have a heart. Yes, as a banker. Piyush Gupta, welcome to Inconvenient Questions.
Happy to join you, Vishwa. And you make it sound like it's a surprise for bankers to have a heart. Let me assure you that very far from the truth.
Well, we'll find out in the next 15 minutes, right? You're clearly the epitome of achievement and success. But conventional wisdom suggests that when you are at that pinnacle, when you're in the giddying heights of success, as you are, you lose something in the process. That the conventional wisdom suggests that you lose a certain humanity, the certain capacity to relate to the man in the street, simply because you're earning so much more. Your lifestyle is different. This is conventional wisdom. And what have you lost in the process of being such a big success?
I actually did the convocation address at NUS a few years ago. And my singular message to the kids was, it is very easy to lose your groundedness as you become successful professionally. But the most important thing that will keep you human and make you real is to try and retain that sense of groundedness. I grew up in a middle-class family. My father was not very well off, he's a bureaucrat. And I grew up like many of us. We didn't have that much money. We had to strive for a living. My friends were everybody, people who are servants, domestic staff, different religions. I used to play with them. This idea of being connected to what I was and what I used to be has been quite central to me. I continue to believe that the easiest way to remember who you really are is go back and spend half an hour with friends you knew when you were young. They'll make you forget all your airs and graces and bring you down to earth very rapidly because they know the true you. And so for me, this has always been very important. I make a lot of time and effort to stay in touch with friends and family, just so that the people who knew me for what I was allow me to continue to be the kind of person I need to be.
Would you agree, Piyush? I mean, I completely accept what you just said, but would you agree that there is always the risk of losing it when you reach that level? Because you get into a different social class, you hang out with people in a different social class, and somehow you forget the past. You forget where you came from. I've seen this happen to a lot of my friends, and it's very, very sad when you see that happen because you can't. They're struggling to come back, and I don't think they want to come back.
I think that risk is very real. I've seen that, like you, Vishwa. I've seen that as well. A lot of people develop a sense of themselves which is very different from what they used to be. And what you said originally is correct. If you earn a lot of money, you become rich, you can afford the good things in life, that risk has to be very real for most people. I don't know whether it's to do with nature or nurture or what drives people in different directions. For me, the fancy, great stuff in life has never been more important than people and human beings. I like hanging out with people. I will spend time and talk to the person sweeping the lobby floor and find out about his life just as I would to a big tycoon.
Is that because you really are interested in that person or because it's good optics?
Well, I do that when there's nobody. I guess it's probably not optics. I just, relate to most people. Well, I do it, for example. I have domestic staff like everybody does at home. I spend a lot of time just trying to figure out about their home, their families, and where they come from and what makes them tick. And I learn so much from them as well. So I'm not trying to make myself out to be a pious saint or anything. Don't get me wrong. I think those risks are real. It just happens that in my case, I'm just quite very comfortable dealing with everybody on fairly objective and equal terms.
So here's my question, next question, right? Very honestly, what would you consider your strongest weakness?
Oh, my strongest weakness is I have a short temper. It's well known. I'm impatient. And when I try to put a positive spin on it, I say I have a very high bar for excellence. And so when people don't, stack up to my bar, I tend to lose it. But there's just a positive spin. The reality is that I have a short fuse and I explode sometimes. Now, the good thing is I never explode for long. I feel apologetic. I go back and make up to people, but it's not good. I've been working on it for a long period of time. My colleagues and friends tell me I have been improving over the last years, but it still continues to be my biggest weakness.
How does the wife take that?
She says I've been improving.
No, then that's the truth, because the wife always tells you the truth more than friends. But how do you manage this? I guess my question to you is, I mean, there are many other senior executives like you who are struggling with similar issues, right? Because the truth of the factor is, if you want to achieve the level of success that you have, the bar has to be up. And there will be a whole host of people struggling to catch up. So it's the nature of the beast, right? So how do you manage this?
Well, I think, let me answer that question at two levels, Vishwa. One is, I really believe that it's not appropriate to compromise for mediocrity. So to get along with people and to be good because you don't want to call people out or make the tough choices, that's not appropriate. And frankly, as CEO, my job is to make sure that we don't wind up making the wrong compromises. And therefore, I try to continue to maintain standards high. And I'm quite happy to be quite direct and tell people what I think. Sometimes people don't like it. I try to couch my language well. But I think you should not change that. On the other hand, I do think it is important to know that you can use artifacts and tools to get your message across in a way that is not humiliating, it's not demeaning, it doesn't shut up the meeting. So we've created a small group of about 3 or 4 people, and them are minders. And so in meetings and forums, if they think I'm really beginning to lose it inappropriately, they are empowered to call me out and tell me, hey, Piyush, maybe you want to take a deep breath. We also created other accoutrements in the bank. We have a concept we call Mojo. So in any meeting we go into, the Mo is the meeting owner and the Jo is the joyful observer. Joyful observer's job is to observe how the meeting is being conducted. And the joyful observer's job is to call out everybody and say, hey, you're not being appropriate. This meeting is not going to be productive. Now, in one of the early meetings, one of the young girls was Jo. And she had the confidence, some people thought verity, others thought lunacy, to call me out and said, you shut the meeting up because the way you spoke. But I took that on board and I gave her a lot of credit for having the gumption to call out the CEO. I think those are good messages, and that gives other people the confidence to criticize and give feedback to each other, including to me. And actually, some of those kinds of inputs have been helpful to me as well.
So you take as well as you give. Is that correct?
Well, that's true. I'm very objective. So I can change my mind quickly if somebody presents me with a good set of facts where the logic is sound and it proves to me that I've been thinking incorrectly, I'll accept it right away. So I'm very objective in and it doesn't matter to me if it's a kid who tells me that or somebody senior. I mean, the logic must be sound. The truth and logic, those count a lot for me.
So, whatever you are talking about so far, Piyush, it is really at the core of leadership. In Singapore, I'm finding leaders, whether they're political leaders or corporate leaders, finding it very hard to say, I'm sorry. And honestly, I respect you for it because I've seen you say sorry in various situations. I've seen you acknowledge that you were wrong, even if you don't say sorry, and sincerely. But I don't see that quality in too many people, sad to say. What's your observation?
So, Vishwa, I think it comes from two things. Either it comes from ego or it comes from insecurity, which is the unwillingness to accept blame, that you could have been wrong or something was not right. To me, we go back to where we started. If you're grounded in the notion that you're a human being, you have to have pluses and minuses, you have to have weaknesses and foibles. And if that is the case, you should expect people to be able to point out to you things that are not great and things that are great. I think self-awareness is a big gift. And focusing on yourself, realizing what you're good at, what you're not good at, and where you screwed up, is actually quite powerful. You won't improve if you're not willing to acknowledge that you need to improve. So I think in leadership, that's important. By the way, one of the big buzzwords these days about leadership is vertical versus horizontal leadership. I think that's important. The old style of leadership was command and control, military structures. You went through the top management, middle management, juniors, etc. The way Max Weber created the bureaucracy, in that kind of hierarchy. Yeah. I think it was legitimate at a point in time, right, to move information, etc. Today, people talk about horizontal leadership, collaborative leadership, being able to make sure that you work with flattened organizations. And I think, frankly, the technology makes it much easier. But also, there's been a big evolution over time. Middleman, the hoarding of information less important, so a lot of people can get together and make things happen. But the real power of horizontal leadership is that at every level in the organization, you've got to be willing to give up ego, and you've got to be willing to accept experts and expertise where it resides. And sometimes knowledge, experts, and expertise reside in the most unimaginable places, in the junior-most people. If you really want to bring the power of horizontal leadership to life, then you have to be willing to accept that, give these junior people a voice, and give them an ability to make impact.
Yeah, and the democratization of knowledge, that's what you're saying. The democratization of knowledge has actually made power a lot more symmetrical.
Absolutely. Because in the past, intelligence was memory. Today, you don't need memory. You can Google anything you want. So now it's a different kind of intelligence. How do you put application? How do you get insight?
One of the criticisms leveled against the corporate Singapore or the political leadership of Singapore is that maybe there are just too many people qualified in STEM subjects, in engineering and so on. And it gives you a different sensibility when you're schooled that way. There's an argument that perhaps we should swing back and have a better balance with humanities, with even philosophy, which a lot of people scoff at. But it gives you a more balanced outlook to life. And it actually has a stronger bearing on true leadership in today's horizontal structure that you're talking about. Your views, Piyush?
I couldn't agree more. I'm actually for more than one reason. One, I believe that the biggest challenges we're going to face in our world as society and mankind in the next 10 years are not going to be challenges of STEM. They're going to be challenges of the softer subjects, right? The humanities and so on. The challenges are going to be what makes us human, what makes us society, why do we work together, what's the difference between us and a computer, what's the difference between us and artificial intelligence, what information should we share and what should we not share. All of these questions are in the realm of philosophy, anthropology, ethnography, understanding why we are who we are. And I'm convinced that the biggest challenges in the next decade are going to come from there. But there's a second dimension to that. And that is this issue back to horizontal organizations and impact. You started the talk by saying, a lot of the young people like to stay on in DBS. And it's not because we pay the best. In fact, on how well do you get paid, we pay well, but we're off the charts. However, people stay because of the capacity to make impact. And impact comes from the realization that you can do real things to real people. You can move the needle. And you can move the needle because you've been given a horizontal platform of trust and empowerment.
Could you give an example where your decision at, a banking decision, a very hardcore banking decision, was to a large extent sort of motivated by humanities, by a humanities orientation, less the hardcore banking orientation?
Let me give you two. One is obviously more germane with the pandemic. In every country, it's been our view very early on that the single biggest challenge people are going to face in the short term is the challenge of cash flow. People won't have the money to service the interest, won't have the money to service their loans. And if the bank is going to continue to chase them like we do in normal times, it's going to add a lot more pressure and tension to them on top of everything else that they're going through. And so we unilaterally took a view in most of our markets to create principal and interest moratoriums for a period of time to give people breathing space. Now, fortunately, most countries, the governments and the central banks piggybacked, and so they became industry-wide responses. But in most places, we started that voluntarily and we started that first, recognizing that this might actually have detrimental outcomes for us in terms of the collectability of our loans, but recognizing that this is probably the right and the humane thing to do given the crisis. The second example I want to cite you is something which is actually very familiar to most Singaporeans. We at DBS bank about 5 million customers. 95% of people in this country have an account. what few people realize is at least 3 million of those 5 million accounts are loss-making for us. We don't make a penny on them. And that is the long tail of the accounts in the heartlands. There's the accounts of the migrant workers. There's the accounts in the POSB franchise. It's often been debated, certainly in the past, about whether we should just exit these accounts. We'd be far more profitable if we did not provide these basic banking services to some of these people. My view has been quite simply that, we as DBS and POSB have a role to play in Singapore. And that role to play in Singapore is far bigger than just the P&L or the shareholder value or the stock price that we get. We have to, if we don't bank these people, who will bank these people? And therefore, our view has been that we need to continue to work on providing basic services to this class of people. Mind you, I'm a good businessman. I keep thinking about how do I reduce the cost of service? How do I provide services that I could make the next small bit of money on? But fundamentally, we took this view very early, that this is something that we need to do for the good of society. It has nothing to do for the P&L.
Yeah. And I guess that's also a very critical part of building trust, building public trust. Because DBS among the local banks is not, you're not viewed in the same way as the other two local banks, or if you include Citibank as well, 3 local banks. But I think that's the distinguishing factor. You have come to accept that DBS will always be viewed by the public differently from the other banks in terms of trust.
That's true. That's sometimes you could argue it's a minus because people say we carry a burden.
Yes.
I think about it differently. My own view is that any company and every corporation exists because it is providing a real community or social need. If you're not providing a real need, you will not get a license from civil society for the long term. So you've got to be very focused on what's today. The buzzword is purpose. But what is the intent? Why were you created and why do you exist?
Why do you exist? It's an existential question. So Piyush, let me end this interview by asking you this very important question. You've been in Singapore long enough to know the DNA of the country, right? If there's one thing in the leadership realm that you would like to see changed, what would that be?
Well, Vishwa, I believe Singapore has had extraordinary success, and in large part, this has been predicated on extraordinary leadership, both from the political spectrum, but also from what has been a world-class bureaucracy. One of the downsides of this approach, of course, has been that the Singapore system is very public sector led. It is led by the government, it is led by the politicians, and the rest of the country just follows. This system has worked very well over the years, but I think times have changed and times are changing. And as we go forward, if Singapore is to continue to aspire to rely on innovation, to rely on entrepreneurship, to be able to use the intense energy of larger numbers of people, then I believe that the system should start getting more broad-based to include broader participation. Frankly, in the last few years, they have tried to do that, and I think it's a good step. There's a lot more that we need to do. The reality is Singapore needs to go from a whole of government to a whole of nation.
Thank you very much, Piyush.
All right, Vishwa, happy to do that.
Have a good day.